So, now that we're winding things down, I wanted to do what I've always promised that I would, or at least said that I wanted to do, and get some of the Patreon exclusive videos out into the general population. It's not like I think they were ever being watched at all over on Patreon. At least I never had a single comment on any of them. But now that I've shut down my Patreon completely, I'm going to just be repurposing them, 10 at a time, into supercuts. I can't guarantee that they're all going to show up here, but I'm going to try, at least for the majority. These are all going to be in their original form as my patrons actually saw them. So let's get started. It's hard to tell the difference between serious theists and lazy idiots because that line gets crossed a lot. This is one of those times. I don't really know what else to say about it, but let's get to it. It would be laughable if this didn't happen so often. This is a video, sort of, from the channel Gonzalez FHL, which honestly, by the end of this, you'll know why this is one of the biggest wastes of time we've ever watched, and why it's really kind of dumb. I can't really imagine that this guy is serious, except in an attempt for money and notoriety. He's just a lazy little fuck, which we all know is not remotely a surprise because that's kind of how religion works. Intellectual laziness defines these people. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Even if God proved himself to atheists, here's why they wouldn't believe.
Now, I'm willing to bet that he hasn't run that past any actual atheists. They never do. This is just a way to maintain their own comfort because having other people that don't buy into their emotional slop, that makes them sad. And they certainly don't want to do that. I have seen a number of videos recently where the theists claiming that there is evidence for their imaginary friends, but the atheists just ignore it because, hell, why the hell not? We don't know. Because this is how the religious work. My book says a thing, and of course since that thing can't be wrong, they have to find a way to make it work in the real world, even though it demonstrably does not. So, I'm not really impressed so far, are you? Let's keep going.
Like an atheist to believe in God. In my opinion, an atheist is not an atheist because of his head, but he's an atheist because of his heart.
Someone else who's never talked to an atheist, I see. And sorry, but why in the world does one theist make a video where the vast majority of the content is just another theist saying the stuff that he likes? Are you incapable of saying it for yourself? And you notice what he said, right? In my opinion. Well, who cares about your opinion? That's just your own absurd wishes and dreams. That's the lie that you're trying to talk yourself and others into to explain why people couldn't possibly disbelieve your stupidity for rational reasons. Again, that would hurt your feelings, and they can't have that, can they? This is really just stupid.
Even if there was definitive proof of God's existence, atheists still wouldn't be Christian.
And how do you know that exactly? One more thing that he's just yanked out of his asshole. Now, in my case, he is correct because the religious desperately want everybody to join their cult. If there was a definitive proof that his God was real, and there's nothing remotely close to that, but if there was, I would believe that his God existed. I have no problem with that at all. I go where the evidence leads and nowhere else. However, it's a completely different question to believe in his God and to bow down and worship it, and he can't bridge that divide rationally. This is because the religious are terrified of their gods. Oh shit, this powerful thing exists. I'd better kiss its ass or I'm gonna get smited. Yeah, sorry, I don't think like that. I am not afraid of your imaginary friend, even if it was proven to be real. I would have to look at the actual deity and decide for myself if it was worthy of my worship. And sorry, but I've read the Bible. Your God is a dick, assuming the Bible is a decent representation of what your God is actually like. So, no, I wouldn't become a Christian. Your God isn't worth it, real or not.
Whoa, whoa. What a claim, Spencer. How can you say that if God was right in front of an atheist, they wouldn't believe?
Now, I did this guy's video already, and I explained all of this there. Hopefully the idiot in the corner is going to come back and do some actual work on his own, but I'm really starting to doubt it. How can you be this lazy? I have no idea. It's why I don't know how serious he is. He's just stealing content from other creators and trying to present it as his own. He's trying to make money off of some other fucker's stupidity. And there are plenty out there that do this. I've pointed that out on the channel before, but at least most of them will use the other creator as a jumping off point and add a significant amount of their own content. But somehow, I kind of doubt that's going to happen here. This guy is just lazy. So let's get back to Spencer making a complete fool of himself and hope this goes somewhere interesting.
In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve would walk with God.
My book says a thing. And if that ever happened, and you've got no evidence for that whatsoever, but assuming that it is true, then you would have sufficient evidence to believe in that instance. I don't. When God shows up for a jog, let me know. But until then, I do not have any reason at all to take any of this seriously. Why are these people so stupid? Well, it says something in a book I really like, and because I believe it, everybody else has to believe it too. No, we don't. We have no reason to. You have provided no corroboratory evidence that any of it ever happened. So why don't you get on that, and we'll just get back to watching Spencer make a complete fool of himself. It's really about all these idiots can do.
Obviously, that is undeniable proof that God exists, would you not agree? And Adam and Eve walked with God, and yet in their pride, they chose not to be with God.
No, actually they didn't, because God didn't provide any ability for them to know that what they were doing was wrong. God set them up to fail. They didn't know the difference between good and evil. That was the whole point of the tree. God put the tree there, but didn't give them the moral sense to know any better. Of course they ate of it. God knew they would. God is omniscient. God knew exactly what was going to happen, and he did it anyway. Adam and Eve didn't choose to be without God. God forced them into the situation, knowing for an absolute fact that it would happen. What the hell is wrong with these idiots? Can they not read?
I mean, look at the Israelites. Imagine being in Egypt when God brought those plagues. Imagine being at the Red Sea when it parted. That is undeniable proof that God existed.
No, actually it's not. Because this is the standard, I don't get it, therefore God bullshit that we see all the time. All a pillar of fire proves is that there's a pillar of fire. It doesn't prove the cause of it. Even if there were plagues in Egypt that we know didn't happen, that doesn't prove that God done it. This is the absurdly uncritical nature of religious belief. They just really want it to be true. They are not remotely skeptical. They are not remotely rational. They just wish the things in their head were so, therefore they're so. That is not demonstrable reality. Not like these lunatics care. If I saw a pillar of fire in my backyard, I wouldn't look out and say, oh look, there's God. I'd say, hey, there's a pillar of fire out there. And I'd probably set out to figure out what was going on. And I'd probably grab a fire extinguisher. Why? Because I'm rational and these numbnuts are not. What a bunch of maroons.
A pillar of fire appearing out of nowhere. That is undeniable proof that God existed. And what does it say about the nation of Israel? That they complained and they were unbelieving.
It doesn't say that at all. It never says they didn't believe in God. It says they bowed down and worshipped other idols because God wasn't doing what they thought he ought to be doing. They weren't getting the results they were after, so they went looking elsewhere. You have to remember, this is a world where they thought there were a ton of gods. Yahweh was the local tribal storm god after all. He wasn't the only one. In fact, he wasn't even that important. All that came later. These people are ridiculously ignorant, as if that's any surprise. I mean, I know it isn't to me. Is it to you?
If people with undeniable proof of God's existence, still some of them decided not to choose God, then I know that it's not about belief in God. It's about surrender to God.
No, it's about fear. It's about you people being terrified of your imaginary friends like you are of everything else. And you're just reading out of your idiotic storybook, believing what it says uncritically, and expecting everyone else to do the same thing. Atheists, modern atheists, do not have that kind of direct, demonstrable, verifiable evidence that you assert that the Israelites had. There is no evidence for any of that, but they just really want it to be true. But they're also not talking to any actual atheists because we just laugh in their faces. These people are fucking idiots. And that's where the video ended, and this moron just stole the content and did absolutely nothing of any value on his own. What a fucking prick. Although, again, that's not exactly a surprise either, is it? This is insanely common among the religious. This guy is just pathetically lazy, more so than the others that I've talked about in the past, and that's just sad. He can't be bothered to do any of his own work, and he picked one of the stupidest things to post on his channel to claim credit for. Screw these people. Screw every single last one of them. I am ever so sick of the stupidity of the religious, aren't you? Religion is dying. We've known that for a very long time now, but the religious don't seem to be able to figure it out. It's okay though, so long as it speeds their inevitable demise, which studies show that it is. It's a very, very good thing. So let's see why they're on the inevitable road to destruction, coming up next. This is a video from James White posted on the channel of Grace Family Baptist Church. Yes, I know it's just a snippet, but I think it has some important lessons to teach. The Baptists, they are not doing well, which is fantastic, but they can't understand why they're dying, and they are dying more quickly with every passing year. I'm going to take a stab at it, and maybe we can figure something out together. Who's up for it? Can I see a show of hands?
It was a debate about homosexuality and whether the Presbyterians should become affirming or non-affirming.
And what makes you think that's any of your damn business? Now, sure, from your perspective, you do you, I guess. This is, however, where I really start to hate a lot of people who seem to think that they have an opinion on absolutely everything, and everybody else needs to know exactly what their opinion is. This is kind of a problem with Hollywood these days, right? Seriously, why do you think anyone gives a damn about you and your stupid opinions? Get back to work and stop whining all the time. But that's kind of the world that we live in today, so let's get back and see where this goes.
And Dr. Kirk was presenting the idea that yes, we should become affirming. And a part of his argument was, look, we've already learned to think past Paul, a first century Jew.
Which is a good thing in my opinion, and if you didn't want my opinion, you wouldn't be watching this video, so really, there we go. If you haven't learned anything new in the past 2,000 years, and let's be honest, the religious really haven't, then you've got some serious problems. If we were still trying to do all the stuff that they did 200 years ago, I'd say that's bad enough. But 2,000 years ago? Give it up. Because this is something that a lot of people need to get through their heads. Things change, humans evolve, societies and cultures become different as time goes on. Our views become supposedly better, although that's often debatable. They just become what we like now, and we give up what we didn't like about the past, and that's kind of how it all goes. If you're not allowing yourself to change, you are just going to stagnate, and if you think that what you believe now is the end-all be-all of reality, you're just an idiot. And there are an unfortunate number of idiots out there, aren't there?
And we also need to learn to recognize that Jesus was a first century Jew as well.
Well, that's your story. Now, I'm not going to get into pseudo-mythicism that we have no evidence for any real first century Jew named Jesus, and we don't have a clue what any real individual, if there was a real individual, might have been like. That's not really the point here. This is about the religious refusing to move on because they can't. They are stuck in the weeds of 2,000 years ago, and there's no way to say, well, we're better than that now. This is one reason why Christianity has so many problems today, and the more strongly you believe any of it, the worse you get, because you can't really say that you've learned anything because they haven't learned anything. That's just admitting that Jesus, whether Jesus was real or not, wasn't that hot, and they can't do that, which is really, really sad.
And so we should not be limited by the categories in which he thought either.
That's true, but you can't admit that, can you? Because you should never limit yourself to what anyone of the past thought or believed. That's why I don't do hero worship. Everyone is wrong at some point, even you. That's why you have to constantly challenge your own preconceptions and test what you already believe against new information, because it's the only way to keep your positions relevant. The religious, they simply can't do that. They're terrified of the very idea. They are so busy living in the past that they don't even know what the present is like, much less being able to look forward to the future. Most of them are trying to end it all so they can go be in a magical happy land in their heads to be with their imaginary friend that they have no evidence actually exists in the first place. And that's kind of dumb, isn't it?
That to open up the door for the Holy Spirit to lead the church to recognize that there are certain things in Scripture that we no longer need to be concerned about.
Not only that, but there are things in Scripture that were wrong all along. Now, granted, I get really nervous about people who pretend that their current moral views are perfect, and there's an unfortunate number of those out there today, that they are true now, yesterday, tomorrow, and forever, so there. There's a lot of people out there that are doing that right now, as I said. There's a lot of people who just can't understand that morality and ethics are a constantly moving target. They don't necessarily get better, they just change. People of the past thought what they thought. We think what we think today, and tomorrow, who knows what the people of the future will believe. That doesn't make any of it right, because there is no right. There's only right now. Tomorrow, who the hell knows? I'm sure you'll get people in 50 years saying that the people of today were complete immoral pricks, just like a lot of people of today are saying about people who lived 50 years ago or 500 years ago or whatever. That's not how this actually works, though. People really need to get a grip.
And when I spoke to Dr. Kirk during the break in the debate, I said, so you don't believe in the Nicene Orthodox understanding of Jesus as being God?
It doesn't matter what you believe. It matters only what is demonstrably true. And sorry for all the religious wingnuts out there, but that simply isn't supported. Like I said, we don't have any real defensible evidence for anything about Jesus, much less God. God isn't even a thing that should be accepted because it's so completely unsupported by anything remotely resembling a fact. These are articles of faith, not fact. Your faith doesn't mean anything. It doesn't get you anywhere. Anyone can believe anything they want, no matter how absurd. The only thing that anyone ought to care about is how they bridge the divide between beliefs and reality. And the religious, if you notice, they're not even trying to do that because they don't care. They just really want to believe.
And he just scoffed and said, "You don't think the apostles thought Jesus was God, do you?"
Who cares? Even if they did exist and weren't just characters in a book of mythology, their beliefs are completely irrelevant unless they accurately represented the state of factual reality. I don't care what flat earthers believe unless the earth is actually flat. It's just not. I don't care what UFO abduction idiots believe unless there really are aliens that are out there kidnapping people. We don't have any evidence to support that objectively. I couldn't care less what any disciples thought about the guy they followed around, assuming that any of that ever happened, any more than I care what the Branch Davidians thought about David Koresh. Your beliefs mean nothing if they're not actually true, because it's the actual truth that matters. And I really wish more people understood that.
I didn't handle that real well.
Because you don't care about reality. Now, probably this Kirk guy, whoever he is, doesn't either, but the religious are really awful at coming to grips with the real world that they actually live in. They want to be special, but they're not. They want emotional comfort. Too bad. They can't handle just living in the reality that they actually do, so they just make stuff up. It is not defensible in any way, shape, or form. They just really like the idea. This is one reason why I think looking behind the curtain from time to time to see the religious talking unfiltered can be educational. They're not holding back. They say what they really believe, and that just reveals just how batshit insane they really are. And I think it's important to understand that. I really do.
I think he was a little surprised at the force of my response, But I let him know very, very firmly, yes, I do believe that the apostles believed that Jesus was God because they taught it over and over and over again. But that's where so many denominations are.
The ones that are going to survive the longest are the ones that can come to grips with reality. This video is on a Baptist church channel, and the Baptists aren't doing so well. Since 2007, the Southern Baptist Conference has been dropping hundreds of thousands of members every single year, yet they're not adapting to reality. Last year alone, they lost 416 churches and lost 500,000 members. 500,000 went away. That's the single largest drop in 100 years. They are going to die sooner rather than later. You know who's going to hold out the longest? The denominations that are willing to give up the worst of the religious bullshit. Of course, worst is a constantly moving target because, for the most part, it's all bad and irrational and delusional and stuff like that. But at least they'll exist, unlike the Southern Baptists who won't. I'm not sure if any of them surviving is a good idea, but at least it won't be the hateful bigots by and large. Let me know what you think down in the comments, though. Should any of them survive, or should we be happy that the worst of the worst are finally going away? At least they're going away first, because I'd really like to know.
And if you've ever been confused listening to these people going, how did they come to that conclusion? It's because they don't believe that this is the Word of God. It is all the Word of God, and it is consistent with itself.
Because it's not. I mean, I can't really speak to it being the Word of God since there's no evidence for any gods in the first place, but it's obviously not consistent. It's chock full of contradictions and bullshit, stuff that never happened. But the religious really want to believe that it did because they can't handle reality as it actually is. I find it really hard to have conversations with people who hold to some of the most ludicrous parts of the Bible. Creationists, people who believe there was a worldwide flood, anybody like that. I just roll my eyes and I walk away because they're too stupid to be bothered with. There was a point maybe 15 or 20 years ago where that was most people, at least a lot of people. Most discussions that you had with the religious had at least some of those elements. Today, it's relatively rare, at least from where I'm sitting, at least from the people that I talk to. Why? Because those people have either died off, and good riddance to them, or they've gotten a clue and gone elsewhere, which is fine for the moment, or they've just realized that it's all nonsense and deconverted entirely, which I think is fantastic, or, and I think this is probably likely, they've just learned to shut up. They realize that it makes them look really bad, so they just don't open their mouths anymore. I think they're getting tired of being laughed at, and I'm fine with that because at least they're not polluting the minds of other people. Because I don't want anybody's mind polluted, and for the ones that just can't give it up, they're just going to keel over sooner or later anyway, and we're just not going to have to deal with them anymore. Both of those are fine with me. They are not being replaced. According to Lifeway research, 66% of theists under the age of 18 walk away from their churches. That's all churches across the board. It's worse for the fundamentalist churches. Church attendance overall is way down to the lowest rates since they started keeping records. These churches are dying, and good riddance to them. At least the few that will survive, at least in the short term, they'll be a little more reasonable. They won't be quite so batshit insane, which I think is a good thing. It's not complete victory, but I think it's something I can live with. How about you? Why are the religious so bad at this? If their imaginary friends were actually real, it shouldn't be hard to demonstrate it in a way that would convince absolutely anyone, right? Yet they can never do it. Instead, we get this. Whatever this is. Be patient, we'll get to it in a minute. Hey, want to see more bad proof that God is real? Because that's all we ever get from the religious. Empty claims, wishful thinking, and nothing that actually demonstrates anything intelligently. Then again, these are not intelligent people, are they? They are emotional wingnuts who just really want to believe, and that is not remotely impressive. So, here we go again. Enjoy. Okay, this is about the point where I started to ask myself if I should even bother with this video because they're already just wasting time, but I got to the point where I said, I figure I'll just push on. This is less than 15 seconds long or so what can possibly go wrong? And this comes from a channel called Science Behind the Bible. And if they're already just wasting their limited time proving God, then I don't know what to tell you. But let's see what comes next, because I just might be questioning my life choices after this, and you might be too.
Bring the action.
And I am. Now, I am going to upload this anyhow because it both serves to show just how stupid all of these How I Know God Is Real videos are, and YouTube videos in general. These are generally not made for smart people to watch. I mean, it's religious, so you already know that, but it's just dumb. It's made for the short attention span crowd, and today that's an unfortunately large group of people, especially a lot of young people. And I'm sorry to all the young people out there, although my channel doesn't generally appeal to millennials and Gen Zs, but if you're here and you got a brain in your head, then you have my apologies that you've actually got to live with these morons. Now, the image is genuine. The first recorded images of the turtle that we have come from the Oxford Veterinary Hospital in Ohio, which posted an image on his Facebook account way back in the early 2000s. Years later, it started popping up on social media. Okay, big deal. Welcome to Pareidolia. There are all kinds of examples of letters and words and things like that that just pop up in nature. Humans, being pattern-seeking creatures, will see patterns and our brains will try to assign them meaning when there is no actual meaning there. This isn't proof for any gods. It's just proof that the video maker is an idiot. And that was it. Really short, really dumb, that proved absolutely nothing but the gullibility of believers, and I think that's really what we need to take away from it. These are people who are desperately looking for reasons to believe in their imaginary friends. If the turtle had said Satan on it or Krishna or anything like that, they never would have brought it up. For the latter, Hindus would be carrying the turtle around on their shoulders as proof for their gods. But it really means nothing. It's nobody's fault that Christians are really uncreative in naming their made-up imaginary friends. A short word is a lot more likely to show up than a long or complex one. Easy letters, which all of those are, they are a lot more likely to pop up in nature, although we have seen the entire English alphabet in nature before. I've shown that in a couple of different videos. Now, try to find Japanese characters or Chinese characters out in the wild. You probably can't do it. Now, granted, Mandarin Chinese is the most difficult language to learn, with more than 1,500 basic characters required to teach basic competency, but we're not talking about language, but the difficulty of the characters themselves. Most of what we use in English are just squiggles compared to what might take minutes to write in Japanese or Chinese. I mean, here's somebody writing one of the most complex Chinese characters, and it takes almost 6 times the length of the entire video that we're reviewing for them to write a single character. Try finding that one in nature. Good luck. And that's why all of this is done in relatively simple character sets, and even that doesn't prove that God is real. It just proves that the turtle had some interesting markings that people could interpret in a way that made them happy because they're stupid. The religious, and to be fair, other people as well, they will see something that they can spin into something that they like, then they declare it's real and feel all warm and fuzzy inside. All that's really happening here is that these people are stupid, because that's how religion works. Let's just leave it at that. It's hysterical when the religious try to use science to defend their beliefs, because they're really not very good at it, are they? In fact, they're downright terrible, as our example today is going to prove conclusively. Hold on to your hats, because this is going to be great. Not that it's at all surprising, but let's get to it. This time we've got a video from a channel called Destiny Image. And this one, my friends, is a peach. I'm going to let you experience this for yourselves because by the end, I hope you're laughing at their stupidity half as much as I was. I honestly don't know what the hell to tell you, so I'm just going to shut up and let the fine folks over at Destiny Image prove once and for all just how dumb a lot of Christians are. And that's not exactly a surprise, but boy oh boy.
Did you know that NASA has done research on the crucifixion of Jesus Christ?
Now, I'm not saying that NASA doesn't do a whole lot more than just shoot stuff up into the air, because they do, but generally speaking, that's what they're known for most of the time. So it doesn't surprise me that maybe somebody at NASA might have done something. We don't even know what yet, but I don't know that I buy that it was done with the blessing of NASA as a whole, again, depending on what this claim actually is. Now, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. I can only respond to what I'm seeing on screen at the time, but I'd be just as skeptical of the claim that NASA had done research on which pizza toppings are the best as I might be for anything that shows up in a religious video. So, go ahead, tell us your story. It's probably not going to prove anything at all.
And what they found aligns perfectly with what the Bible tells us.
Bet it doesn't, because these things are always interpretation. Nobody really cares what it says in your silly book of multiple choice. Of course, the religious will never accept that. They think that everybody's just clamoring to find out about their imaginary friends, but let's wait until he says more until we pass judgment. I'm sure we're not going to be impressed, but hey, I could always be wrong, and I'm man enough to admit it if I am. I just hope there's more to this than empty claims, and I think we all know that's all there's going to be, but hey, I'm willing to give it a shot. So please, good sir, continue.
The Bible says in Matthew 27:45, "From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land."
Which never happened because solar eclipses simply can't go on that long. It's physically impossible for the moon to sit in one spot and cover the sun for 3 hours. That's just bullshit. The longest recorded eclipse in history lasted 7 minutes and 28 seconds, and that happened on June 15th, 743 BCE. How do we know that? Because we can track extraterrestrial objects with incredible precision. We can tell you when the next eclipse is going to be and how long it's going to last. And in fact, the next total solar eclipse that will happen anywhere in the world is going to happen on August 12th, 2026. If you're in Spain, look up. If you're waiting for one in the US, you've got to wait until 2033. The next total lunar eclipse is going to happen on March 14th, 2025. These things are really, really easy to predict. There has never and will never be a 3-hour solar eclipse anywhere. That's just reality. That's how reality works.
This is referring to the time of Jesus' crucifixion. Now, let's dive into some details. Scholars generally agree that Jesus was crucified on April 3rd, 33 AD.
You have no evidence for that, though. That's just a story in a book of mythology. It means about as much as Harry Potter starting at Hogwarts on September 1st, 1991. You haven't established that there ever was a crucifixion at all, therefore attaching a date to it is completely meaningless. You're putting the cart a couple of light years ahead of the horse. Of course, this is a video being made for the already religious, and they don't mind lying outright if they get what they want out of it. That doesn't convince me at all. What actual evidence do you have to support any of your claims? And the answer to that is, of course, not a damn thing.
Here's where it gets mind-blowing. According to data from NASA, there was a partial eclipse in Jerusalem on that exact day.
So what? That doesn't mean the crucifixion actually took place. Like I said, we can predict these things really, really accurately. So, since you can't establish a demonstrable date for the supposed crucifixion, what difference does it make? Did somebody look at the chart and then just pick the date and time of an eclipse on that date because, hey, it lends credence to their story? Because if you look, this isn't even a solar eclipse. It's a lunar eclipse. Lunar eclipses don't make things go dark because they happen in the middle of the fucking night. Matthew 27:45 says there was darkness over all the land, but in the middle of the night, it's already dark. Are you really this stupid? Apparently so.
The duration of the eclipse was about 2 hours and 50 minutes, which matches the timeline described in the Bible.
No, it doesn't, not unless Jesus was crucified in the middle of the night. It matches absolutely nothing in the Bible. Nothing at all. This is what happens when these morons are so desperate to get to anything that just sounds good to them, because they actually had to make a video showing just how stupid they are. I had to make a comment on this video because it's so dumb. I know it's not going to help, but it's rarely this painfully obvious just how dumb these morons are. This is why I spend so much time laughing at them, because they really are this stupid.
So, if you ever needed more proof that the Bible is true, here it is. Modern science backing up ancient scripture.
No, you just proved that you're an imbecile. This is what happens when you don't stop for 4 seconds and think. It absolutely supports nothing in the Bible. Because if you go back to the very same NASA website and look at solar eclipses, there were none on or around that date period. There was one on March 19th, which happened in the Indian Ocean, and one on September 12th, which happened in Kazakhstan. There were none even remotely close at the time that they're claiming. I'll link to the site down in the comments if you want to go look it up for yourself. These people are just idiots.
If you want more amazing discoveries like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with your friends to spread the word.
Oh, I'm speeding it to the fine people on Patreon because this is one of the most embarrassing things that I've seen from the religious in a very long time. I suppose the only downside is that more people won't see it, which is why I'm going to ask if it's okay to throw this up on the regular channel too at some point in the future. I think more people need to see just how dumb the religious are when they're out there trying their hardest to prove what a bunch of fucking morons they are. Not that I think we really need any more convincing, because this kind of thing isn't that uncommon. This one, though, this is just amazingly blatant, and I might not say if this was a brand new video, but at the time that I'm making it, it's been out there for at least 2 months, and nobody has caught on to the stupidity yet. At least the video creators haven't taken it down yet, and they should, because this is ludicrously embarrassing. I don't often ask people to go over and leave comments on videos, but I think this is one, respectfully, that more people ought to go and say, what the fuck is wrong with you idiots on? This is the desperation that the religious have to get to their fantasy beliefs because they really can't deal with actual reality. Ignore the obvious facts and just believe. Because, geez, these people are really, really dumb, aren't they? Can anyone please prove the existence of God? Not claim it, not assert it, not pretend it's just got to be true because faith and fifis. Actual evidence presented in a way that is objectively testable, so we can figure out once and for all that a specific God actually exists. Is that ever going to happen? I wouldn't bet on it, but let's see. We're actually going to do one from BitChute this time out from a channel called Vlad Savchuk. And if I butchered that name, I'm sorry. And I don't really pay a lot of attention to BitChute, granted, mostly because a lot of the content that I see there is just copied over from YouTube anyway, just like mine is. But sometimes I will see something there and here we are. So, can Vlad prove the existence of God? Let's find out.
The proof for the existence of God in 60 seconds.
That would be nice. Of course, lots of people claim that they can prove God, often without the hard time limit, but their supposed proofs are always laughably bad. And I'm sorry, but I'm just not holding out much hope that his are going to be any better. That ought to be a problem for the religious, but they really aren't that concerned, are they? Their evidence, which is a better word to use than proof, I suppose, is terrible. But they aren't concerned about the actual evidence at all, because they're just running on pure fifis and faith, and when you're not using your brain for any of it, which most of them just aren't, the fact that they can't understand just how terrible this looks to anybody on the outside of their echo chamber, that doesn't really matter much to them one way or the other, right? So, sure, go right ahead, Vlad, give us your best shot. But I wouldn't be holding my breath because we're probably going to be laughing.
So this is my wife's painting. I think it's almost done. This is her station.
Okay, it's fine, I guess. I was never really much of a painter. I mean, I was an artist when I was younger before I went off and got into other things, but cool if you really like her work, or don't, since he didn't really say, and I don't think it really matters that much. How does this have anything at all to do with actually proving the existence of any God? And I'm probably going to regret asking that, aren't I?
My wife is a painter. She actually went to school for it and then she won awards for it. Now, the painting behind me is what she painted.
Okay, so what? Now, I'm not going to diminish her accomplishments or anything, but I am just not seeing a connection between a painting done by his wife and the existence of an actual demonstrable God. Now, he's only got 60 seconds by his own admission, so why has he wasted a full third of it talking about his wife and her painting? Come on, speed it up, bro. You're running out of time.
Imagine I woke up in the morning and this just appeared out of nowhere. You would think I'm crazy.
Hell, I already think that. This is just going to be another one of those stupid design arguments, isn't it? Well, it all had to come from somewhere. Well, that's just a God of the Gaps claim. God must have done it because I can't dream up anything else that's emotionally comforting. But nobody cares what you can dream up. Nobody cares what's comforting to you. This isn't proof for a God. Any God. This is just, but I really want it to be true. And this is just being lazy and running out of steam. Well, God done it. Says who? How do you know? And more importantly, how do you prove it? Because that's what he's pretending that he can do, right? This is just, well, I don't understand it, therefore God. But that doesn't mean anything. You haven't gotten to a God, any God, much less your God. You haven't provided any evidence for that whatsoever. This is just, but I really want it to be true. But that doesn't mean anything. So I hope he's going to get better than that. But he's really only got 29 seconds left, so I don't know how much we can expect.
Right? Because paintings don't just appear. Somebody paints them.
But it doesn't make it your God. I mean, it doesn't make it any God, but it certainly doesn't make it yours. That's the whole problem here. You are asserting things that you simply cannot defend. Saying, God done it, doesn't mean that God done it. It doesn't mean that any God done it. Your wishes and your dreams mean absolutely nothing. Your assertions mean nothing. This is only proving that Vlad is an uncritical, irrational moron. And I really don't think that's all that much of a surprise, do you?
See, a painting is a proof that there is a painter. Building is the proof that there is a builder. And creation is the proof that there is a creator.
Except you haven't shown that there is a creation. This is just an assertion, nothing more. Just because you really want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. This is all just a giant word game. If I pointed out just how irrational this was to him, I'm sure that he just turned to faith or something like that, because he can't actually show that anything was actually created on a universal scale. Calling it a creation, that doesn't make it a creation. It just makes you look mental.
Without an intelligent designer, you would not be an intelligent being. So my friend, there is your proof that there is a God. You are the proof that there's a God because you are his creation, created for.
Yes, that is actually where it ended. Seriously, how can these people be this incompetent? How can anyone not have cut out those last two words? Don't these people watch the videos before they upload them? Of course, then it wouldn't have been exactly 60 seconds, but so what? At least you wouldn't look like a completely incompetent boob then. I mean, not like your video made you look like anything else, because this is all just wishful thinking and bullshit, just as we expected it to be. This is why all of these videos are just so dumb. Because they don't understand what proof is. They have no clue what evidence is. They just really want to believe. They start with that emotionally comforting idea in their head, and then because they just really like it, it becomes the automatic answer to every single question posed. Except it isn't. God done it means nothing without evidence that God is real and actually did anything. You have to start with the evidence before you get to the belief. And the religious can't do that because they don't care. They just want to believe. They just want to feel good. Then they assume that everybody else is just like they are. Everybody else also just wants to believe what they do. And when we don't, when we laugh at their unfounded assertions, when we point out just how dumb it all is, they get butthurt because we're all supposed to want their gods. We just don't. We want the truth. And sadly, they don't. They want comfort, not fact. We want fact, not comfort. Never the two shall meet, sadly. That's not our problem, though. It's theirs. They are the problem. They'll never admit it, of course, but they are the problem. So we'll just have to keep making fun of them because they can't get it through their minuscule little pea brains that they're the ones doing everything wrong. Sad, isn't it? The religious seem to think that they can prove that their religions are true, but the moment that they try, it becomes obviously clear what they're really doing. They're just trying to desperately run back to mama because they really want these things to be true, even if they're not. They can't demonstrate anything but their own stupidity and desperation. And here comes yet another clear example. So, this video purports to prove Christianity is true and prove every other religion false in just 1 minute. It's on a channel called Love Speaks, and if I had to guess, it's going to prove, with those massive air quotes, by simply assuming that Christianity is true, and that automatically makes all the rest false just because. Now, I hope it's better than that, but you never know. So let's just let love speak and just see how good any of my bullshit detectors actually are.
If you study the arguments for God's existence, you'll end up with a monotheistic God, which would make the creator and designer of everything one God.
Except all of the philosophical arguments that he's presenting on screen, they're all nonsense. We've taken them all apart a lot over the years, and none of them mean anything at all. Essentially, they're all, I don't get it, or I don't like it, therefore God. But that's not an argument for any God. That's a demonstration of your own gullibility. And pretty much any religion can, and often does, simply present a variation of those arguments for their own gods. This guy is assuming that the ones made by Christians are the only ones that exist, therefore God is real. That makes this guy an idiot only 7 seconds in.
This would negate all but 4 religions: deism, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity.
Nope, because the gods that those religions purport are really no different than the gods of polytheistic religions. They just do it in one while the others use multiple deities to get to the same place. This is why I keep saying that you need to take yourself out of it. You can't just assume that all of the things that you already believe are true, because that's just confirmation bias. I'm right because I'm right, therefore I'm right. No, you need to be able to step back, and sadly, most people have a real problem with that. They just really want to believe what they really want to believe, but that doesn't make any of it true, does it?
All of these religions have quite a different opinion of Jesus, so we can conclude 3 different things.
Before we get to that, who the hell cares about Jesus? You can already see that he's personally biased toward his own religion, to the point that he can't even evaluate different religions intelligently. If Christianity isn't true, then Jesus isn't even a thing. Jesus is right off the table. Jesus doesn't matter. If Islam isn't true, then Muhammad doesn't matter. You can't just cling to your silly beliefs if you're trying to get to actual truth, and none of these numbnuts actually are, right? They just really want to believe, but that means absolutely nothing in reality.
They can't all be right. They could all be wrong. Or one of them's right.
But the trick here is determining which, if any of them, are actually right, and none of them have any actual evidence to support them. He's just taken arguments that he already likes and agrees with for emotional reasons and used them to pare down the potential candidate explanations without caring one bit about the only thing that actually matters. Evidence! Just because you really want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. It doesn't matter how many times they do this, it's going to be fallacious every single time. So please, up your game. You are the one making yourself look silly. Knock it off.
Let's see what they say. Deism says Jesus was only human. Islam says Jesus was Messiah but never died on the cross. Judaism says Jesus existed but he wasn't the Messiah or God. Christianity says Jesus is God and he proved it by his resurrection from the dead.
So what? Jesus doesn't matter. It would be like a Muslim getting up there and saying, well, let's look at what people think of Muhammad. Who cares? Fuck Muhammad and fuck Jesus too. This is just a clear attempt to shoehorn in your existing religious beliefs into the discussion where it absolutely does not belong. The only thing that matters in any discussion over which religion, if any, is factually correct, is the evidence that said religion is factually correct. The parts that you like about the religion are irrelevant. Stop being a dumb shit.
What would be so miraculous about Jesus rising from the dead? When studying the accounts of Jesus' arrest, scourging, and crucifixion, you'll realize he was certainly dead on that cross.
So, my book says a thing. Who cares? If you look at Islamic beliefs, Muhammad split the moon in half. Now, I know this guy would say, well, I don't believe that happened. But yeah, I don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, so where does that get us? This is just, my silly stories are true and yours aren't. Yeah, prove it. Of course, he won't, because he can't, and he just doesn't care. But this brings us right around to his complete inability to take that giant step backwards and leave his religious faith behind. If you want to know what is true, you have to be able to determine what is true. And you do that with evidence. You don't do that with faith. If you can't do that, then you're just wasting everybody's time.
What's important about this is 3 days later, his body was missing out of the tomb, and he was seen for 40 days by individuals and groups of people.
My book says a thing is still not impressive. The same thing could be said about Islam. The same thing could be said about Judaism. It could be said about pretty much any religion out there. All these religions that claim to have eyewitnesses for the miraculous thing in their books, they can't prove they actually have any eyewitnesses. The one thing that none of you have is any demonstrable evidence that any of it ever happened in the first place. Just because somebody wrote it down, that doesn't make it true. Why don't you go try and find that actual evidence? And good luck on that, because you're going to need it. If you got a Jew making this video, they could just point to the pillar of fire that helped lead the Hebrews out of captivity. I mean, never mind that that never happened, but the Torah says lots of people saw it. So, that doesn't prove that it's real. This guy, he's just a real idiot, but that's not really much of a surprise, is it? So anyway, go ahead, keep making a fool of yourself. That's all any of you seem to be able to do.
During this period, they ate with him, touched him, walked and talked with him until he ascended into heaven.
Prove it without quoting your book of mythology. You can't. I mean, I could write down that earlier today, I decided to go outside, flap my arms, and fly around the city, and 1 million people saw me do it, proving that I am the one true God and you should just send me all your money. Does that make any of it true? Of course not. You'd have to be a real idiot to believe that, just like this guy is a real idiot for believing what he does. Faith is not fact. Fact requires corroboratory support. Go find some and stop looking dumb.
Jesus fits the criteria for the arguments of God's existence and has and is changing millions of lives, and that's why Christianity is true and everything else is false.
Yeah, pretty much what I said. He's using the arguments that he likes for Christianity, ignoring all the arguments that proponents of other religions use, and often they're the exact same argument. And then when he comes to the conclusion that he was predisposed to all along, he can't figure out that he's just been wallowing in confirmation bias the whole time. And yes, his comments are full of people pointing this out. He's getting absolutely destroyed, but he doesn't care because he's not that bright. Now, to his credit, he actually does respond badly because he can't get his nose out of the Bible and he doesn't want to. When you start with blind faith and arguments that you accept emotionally and refuse to consider anything else, well, of course you're going to conclude that you are right all along. What a dipshit. Of course, tons of people do that these days and probably always have. They're just not looking for truth. They're looking for confirmation and fee-fees, and they're only speaking to other people who already believe because, that's what they really want to be true. It doesn't make any of it true, though, but they don't care. They have no interest in truth at all. They only want to feel good. Unfortunately, it just makes them look stupid, mostly because they are. This really can't be that hard to figure out, can it? But will the religious ever be able to do it? Yeah, my magic 8-ball says signs point to no. The religious never fail to prove just how stupid they are, but we're going to keep pointing it out regardless. This is not remotely impressive, but what can you expect from the religiously deluded? Let's go see where they go wrong this time, because they always do. This isn't even surprising anymore, is it? Today, we get a twofer. Frank Turek and Mike Winger both making complete fools of themselves because they're both gutless wonders and con men. That's not exactly a surprise, I know, but we'll see just how terrified both are under their false, made-up bravado because they're scared of their imaginary friend and they expect everybody else to be scared too. Too bad we're not, but let's get to it so we can see them go completely wrong.
If historic Orthodox Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
This is always a bad question, and I'll explain why. If any religion was demonstrably true, then I would believe it was true. The whole conversion thing is something else entirely. The religious, they don't seem to understand that. Or rather, I think a lot of them understand, they just don't care. Instead, they are only interested in...
We'll make her one of us, a loving cup, a loving cup. We accept her one of us, we accept her one of us. Gooba gobble, gooba gobble. We accept her, we accept her. Gooba gobble, gooba gobble. One of us, one of us. Gooba gobble. They're going to make you one of them. My peacock.
And that's foolish. I would have to be convinced not only that it was factually correct, and they're nowhere remotely close to doing that, but that it was also worthwhile. It's like saying, if there was a king, would you bow down and worship it? No, I wouldn't. First, I'd have to be convinced that the king, now that its existence was actually firmly evidentially established, that it was worthy of my worship. And of course, Frank is just playing the what-if game when he has absolutely no way to establish that Christianity is factually true, period. We know that they mean, well, because it's true, not if it's true, and that's positively stupid. So, get to the first part, then we'll talk.
Define Christian. Like
Following Jesus' commands and trusting in him for your salvation.
Yeah. I would say I would need more information. I would become...
if it were true.
Here, Frank is desperately trying to push his narrative, and it just doesn't work. I don't play the what-if game. I care only what is, and he hasn't established the truth of his proposition yet. If he wants to do that, go ahead, provide your evidence, convince me that it's true. Because until you can do that, everything thereafter is worthless. Because people like Frank just assume that they're right without being able to demonstrate that they actually are. And it's the demonstration that matters, and this is exactly why I don't play along with what if. Show me what is. There is no point to playing these games at all, but this is just a stage show for Frank's paying audience, isn't it? He doesn't care what the atheist has to say because he's got a script ready for any eventuality. It doesn't matter what this guy has to say. Frank will have something to use against him. Why? Because Frank is an asshole.
Yeah, I'm saying then it would depend on what his commands are, whether I agreed with them.
For those who are like, you're an atheist skeptic, you're just a non-Christian, you're kind of on the fence, that's the question I have for you today is, if Christianity is true and you knew it, would you commit your whole life to Christ?
And here, Mike Winger is just playing off the dishonesty of Frank Turek because that's what these idiots do. They completely ignored what the guy said because they just don't care. But I do agree with the unnamed atheist guy. It depends entirely on the details, and I'd have some serious questions in that situation. There's a difference between God is real and God deserves your worship. You need to understand that these do not go hand in hand. Of course, for the religious, they have to, because the religious are terrified of their imaginary friends. Oh no, if I don't kiss its ass, it's gonna smite me. So they just throw their intellectual honesty right out the window out of fear. And that is positively childish. It just proves what a complete pussy Mike is, because, like Frank, they're all that way. Hell, in World War II, Mike would probably be one of the first ones out there singing Deutschland über alles because Hitler would kill his ass. It's the same reason that the Catholic Church was on the side of the Nazis. It was out of fear that something bad would happen to them if they actually stood up for their beliefs. The second anyone might cause them problems, it's, yes sir, Führer, sir. Because these people are idiots, and it hasn't gotten any better in the past 80 years, just like it hasn't been any better in the past 2,000. In fact, it's probably gotten worse.
Would you truly worship and follow Jesus Christ, trusting in him, loving him, obeying him?
Has he earned it? You notice that they can't even ask that question, right? They don't care. They just want to save their own asses, and that is utterly pathetic. Whereas I would say hell no. Now, granted, that's a lot easier to say than to do in practice. I admit that, but I do everything in my power to get the hell away from the Nazis so I didn't have to put up with their crap. Then I'd go and join the military on the Allied side so I could just go and kill the fucker. That's the same attitude I have toward the God of the Bible. If the Bible is a remotely accurate representation of that God's character, fuck him. That God is an asshole. It's something that Bionic Dance used to say, and I agree, but if God turned out to be real, I'd be out looking for the magic sword that would kill his evil ass. I wouldn't bow down to that, and you shouldn't either. That's why we need to be asking these questions to find out just how close this now proven real God of theirs is to the evil asshole presented in the Bible. Because if it's anything like that, hard pass. Fuck that guy.
And if your answer is, then there's a spiritual heart issue you're dealing with. And that has to be overcome. That has to be dealt with.
No, it doesn't. That has to be celebrated. Of course, the religious can't do that because they're terrified of their imaginary friend. That's the problem. This isn't a spiritual heart issue. It's one of a complete lack of any kind of backbone. That's why Winger would be a goose-stepping Nazi in a heartbeat, because he's terrified to have his life slightly inconvenienced. That's why he believes in the first place, because it gives him a way to get around the actual reality of the world that he lives in to an emotionally comforting happy land in his head where he can just tell himself that everything's going to be okay just because he really, really, really wants it to be. Mike Winger and Frank Turek, since that's where we started, they're both assholes. They're both chicken shits. Don't be like that. You can be so much better.
Or you won't be able to see clearly because we're committed, before we hear the answer, we're committed to our conclusion that we're not going to follow.
That's the lie that you tell yourself because you really wish it was true. It's not actually the case, though, not that they care. That's why you refuse to acknowledge that you're asking two entirely separate questions here. One is a matter of fact. Does this God of yours actually exist in some demonstrable way in the real world that we all share? That's got to be answered first, and at the moment, there's no evidence whatsoever supporting that at all. So right there, the religious just lose. That's why they're playing this stupid if game. They have no way to show that the if is actually real. But setting that aside for the moment, there is an entirely separate question, entirely beyond the factual existence of any demonstrable God. And that's the worth of the God in question. And this works for absolutely any God out there, anywhere. It works for anything, not just gods. And that is this God actually worth your worship? Has it earned your adoration? Is it an asshole? Because I don't want anything at all to do with a God who's an asshole. And let's be really honest, we've read the Bible, we know what it says about that God. I want nothing to do with that God, and if I have to go to hell to get away from it, that's entirely fine with me. Of course, had anyone ever said that to Frank or Mike or most other apologists, both would have said, "You don't really mean that." Yes, I do. Absolutely I do, because I have a backbone. Whereas they don't. I don't live my life in fear of what might happen. I just deal with what does. This is something that most theists can't do because they don't have the mental or emotional fortitude to stand up on their own 2 feet and stand up to the bullies that are rampant out there. The biblical God is a bully. Fuck that guy, even if he was real. This just shows once again how weak-willed and weak-minded the religious really are. And that's not much of a surprise, is it? The religious, they don't know what evidence is, do they? It's why every time they pretend that they've got some, it turns out that they're laughably wrong. Then they just run around with the goalposts some more, crying that we're just mean for trying to get them to back up their claims. And I'm sorry, but we're not going to stop. Maybe you should just rent a clue. Not expecting them to do it or anything, but maybe they ought to give that a shot. So let's take a look. Today, we've got a short video from Spencer Nakamura, who is a popular YouTuber, but he's not a very bright individual. He doesn't seem to understand what evidence is. Not that that's any real surprise, because he, like all the rest, just really wants to believe. But he wants to make excuses for why the things he takes on faith, well, those just have to be true, and if you don't believe it, that means you're a mean poo-poo head who just wants to make him sad. And yeah, that's about as far as it goes. He doesn't present any actual evidence, not that he really has enough time in this video, but I've seen some of his regular videos, and he does no better there. No real surprise. So, let's get into it.
Christianity is not a blind belief.
Yes, it is. That's all that it is. If it wasn't, then you would have evidence. Not what you wish was true, but actual, demonstrable evidence that you can show to absolutely anyone who asks. 1 Peter 3:15. You just don't have that. Instead, you've got faith. And if there was ever a clear demonstration of blind belief, it's the existence of faith. Anything that you have faith in, that is a blind belief by definition. Because if you have evidence, you don't need faith. Faith is the excuse that you give yourself when you don't have any good reason to believe it otherwise. So no, Spencer, you're just wrong.
Contrary to the opinion of a lot of skeptics and atheists, we don't believe just because we went to Bible school as a kid and we fell in love with these fairy tales.
Well, maybe. Now, granted, most Christians, they don't go to Bible school, but they were indoctrinated into the belief at an age before they had any concept of skepticism, reason, or evidence. They believe now because they were brainwashed into it. And that's very, very hard to get out of once you've had it done to you, which is why the church is so fired up on childhood indoctrination. It works. It's why almost all religions do it, at least the successful ones. Not all Christians had it stuffed into their heads before the age of reason, but a huge number did. So, you're still wrong. Mostly.
In fact, when you really dive into it, the evidence of the life and the resurrection of Jesus is so compelling that it's reasonable and rational to at least consider the idea of the Christian God.
No, it is not compelling, at least not unless you have a ton of faith first. The faith is the problem. There is nothing that you could present right now that would stand up to any degree of skeptical rigor. But it says so in the Bible. But that's a faith claim, though. You haven't proven that the Bible is true or accurate. That is just an assertion, based often on the aforementioned childhood indoctrination and brainwashing. You cannot demonstrate to anyone who doesn't take those things on faith first, which proves that you don't have any actual evidence. You just have blind belief, which is faith. And that's why most theists fail, because they just assume things are true that are not, in fact, verifiably so. And that's why we ask the questions that we do, and why the religious fail so miserably. How do you know that? Not what you can assert, not what you believe, not what you have faith in. How do you know? Because knowledge requires some demonstrable basis in objective fact. And more importantly, how do you demonstrate that to others who don't hold your beliefs a priori? Just because it sounds really good to you, that doesn't mean anything. Grow up.
But the hurdle that a lot of people can't get over is the idea of undeniable proof.
We're not asking for that. We are asking for your corroboratory evidence that shows that the things you are claiming are actually true. We are asking how you know. Not why do you believe, how do you know? What evidence can you present to us that shows us that you have the slightest clue what the hell you're talking about without having to rely on faith? Well, it says so in the Bible. So what? That never becomes more convincing. How do you know that the Bible is true? Present your evidence. Well, this is what God is like. And how do you know that? Please present the evidence that you followed that led you to that conclusion rationally. You can't do it, and that's the problem. If they had a rational position, they should be able to do that. Most people can. I can do that with every position that I hold because I think about these things and I compare it to objective demonstrable reality. I have things that I can point to directly without having to have faith, because faith is not a virtue. Anybody who thinks that it is, they are a moron.
Well, if there's any room for doubt, I'm not going to believe it. But by that logic, if you're on the jury for a murder case and there's a suspect and he has fingerprints at the scene, he has no alibi for the time of the crime, he has a motive against the victim, and there's eyewitness testimony of him coming and going from the murder scene, you're still going to say, no, he's innocent because there's no video evidence of undeniable proof that he did the crime.
Most of that is circumstantial, though, isn't it? Even if you say he's got a motive and opportunity and eyewitnesses put him generally at the scene, that builds a better case, but it doesn't prove he did it. And that's why the court system isn't based on absolute proof, which, let's be honest, doesn't exist for anything anyway. It is based on making a case and convincing a dozen people to vote your way. And those dozen people get it wrong quite a bit. It's not about truth. Necessarily. It's about the opinion of 12 people who weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty. And that's not really a good recommendation, is it? You can take all of that stuff and it's all done away with if the person in question has an alibi at the time of the crime. They might have been in the area about that time, but when the crime actually happened, they were across town in the presence of a dozen people who can vouch for their whereabouts, and therefore, all of the circumstantial stuff doesn't matter. They didn't actually do it. And there have been a ton of people who've been exonerated of crimes that they didn't do when evidence was found that they couldn't have done it, no matter how damning the circumstantial case against them might have been. Now, let's get back to religion, where you don't have anything remotely that strong to present. You have the claims in a book of mythology that you happen to like, and faith. How is that supposed to convince anyone to take you seriously? Get back to us on that, won't you? I don't think it's going to be impressive.
If you ask me, that's choosing to be blind. It takes courage to humble yourself and follow the evidence and just see where it leads.
We do. It just doesn't lead to your religion or any religion for that matter. That's why we ask the questions that we do. Show us how you got there, absent your faith and fifis. Walk us through the steps directly. Show us the evidence along the way. Not what you believe, not what you want to be true, not what you've been brainwashed into, the actual evidence that convinced you that any of this stuff happened. And they don't have that because they have no actual evidence. They have confirmation bias. They are only looking for things that they can twist into looking like it agrees with the things they already believe. But that is not impressive, is it? Because, funny, they don't seem to have anything that actually would convince a rational person. They just have claims, and claims don't mean anything. They just have faith, and faith doesn't mean anything. They just have wishes and dreams, and those don't mean anything either. What they are suggesting is like going into the courtroom and just declaring that the defendant is guilty because I've just got a feeling. But that doesn't mean anything, does it? I need to know how you know. I need you to be able to show me what you claim is actually true. And if you can't, you're not only going to get booted out of the courtroom, you're probably going to go straight into the back of a police car from wasting the court's time. I have faith means nothing. Your feelings mean nothing. Only the demonstrable facts do, and sadly, you just have nothing at all to present that we can examine with our own eyes, absent the blind faith that you have. Come back when you've got something like that, because otherwise, it's all just a bunch of excuses, and excuses don't mean a damn thing, do they? And that's why you get laughed at. Because you're just a stupid fool. Why are the religious so dumb? I ask that a lot, but I never get any decent answers. Well, today, we're going to look at a real idiot, a self-identified idiot, and see what his thought processes are like. And the answer is, they just don't exist at all. That's going to be painfully obvious by the end, so let's get to it. So, this is kind of an interesting video made by a guy called Gnarly Tree Man, in which he claims that atheism is stupid, and I'm guessing he's going to try at least to explain why. No, he's just going to prove that he's a complete imbecile and leave no doubts on the matter, because sometimes you just have to look at the worst that the religious side has to offer, and then you will be able to see that clearly in all the rest. We've done this before, but it's always interesting to do it again. So, here we go.
Hey y'all, just some thoughts from a dumb redneck.
Alright, I'm gonna stop you right there. If you know you're a dumb redneck, then maybe you should, maybe do something to improve yourself? Because why in the world do you think anyone cares about your thoughts? This is a question I think a lot more people need to seriously consider these days because, holy shit, there's a lot of dumb crap going on out there, isn't there? Just because you had a random shower thought doesn't mean you need to make a video about it. But anyhow, what are your thoughts, self-identified dumb redneck? Please make them worthwhile, but I'll be honest here, I'm not going to be holding my breath, and I don't think you should be either.
Take height, width, depth, and time of the universe times infinity.
That doesn't even make sense. I mean, the obvious bit is that infinity isn't actually a thing, it's just a concept, and you can't multiply anything by a non-existent thing and come up with any realistic answers. which makes the rest of it absurdly dumb. Yes, I know he did identify himself as a dumb redneck, and if you look at religion, there's a lot of these people out there, but come on, at least understand the limits of your own knowledge and try to do something intelligent about it. I'm just wondering where he's going to go with this, and I figure it's going to be something like, well, it makes no sense without God, or some stupid bullshit like that. But this is where I keep running into problems. Just stapling God done it onto something you don't understand, and I'm willing to bet there's a lot of things this guy has no clue about, or that you just don't like, that means absolutely nothing. And just saying, well, I'm a dumb redneck, is no excuse for putting your ugly face on camera and making a complete fool of yourself. Because this is pretty much how most apologists operate, right? We see this in the regular channel all the time. People who show up, make bizarre, stupid pronouncements, and then say, well, I'm a Christian, and from a Christian perspective, I'm right. Yeah, go fuck yourself. You're an idiot. They just start with this bizarre, unjustified conclusion, reached for entirely emotional reasons, and then they just pretend that because they really, really, really like these ideas, well, they just have to be true, and must therefore answer whatever questions they come up with, and if you don't understand that, then you're a mean poopy pants, or something stupid like that. Because these people aren't after the actual truth. They just want to feel good. And that's why they go wrong so often. Not like they actually care.
Okay, because those are all infinite.
There is no such thing as an actual infinity. That doesn't exist in reality. None of those things are actually infinite. There is an outer limit to the size and scope of the universe. The observable universe, at least at the moment, is about 28.5 gigaparsecs across, or about 93.016 billion light years. Space is really, really, really big, but it is not infinite. Time, as we know, started with the Big Bang, so even if it did somehow go on forever and ever and always, that would still not make it infinite. So this guy's even more ignorant than I thought. I think these people are just so amazed at big numbers that their brains break when they even try to consider them. Because they just can't understand. They try to turn it into something mystical, which it absolutely isn't. The whole idea just makes their eyes glaze over. This also falls under the fallacy of large numbers, which we see from the religious all the time, where because the odds of something happen to be remote, that means that the thing simply cannot happen, therefore God. This is really just stupid. Just because the numbers you're dealing with are very large, that doesn't mean they're meaningful or that you can derive anything useful from their largeness. Again, this all comes down to the absurd ignorance of a lot of people, in this case religious people, because they are desperately trying to get to their imaginary friend, not to evaluate the reality that they live in intelligently or rationally.
Now, multiply that by the chance of evolution of a god.
What does that even mean? First off, define God, because I don't think you can do it. Most gods are just made-up concepts that happen to appeal to the gullible idiots that believe them. They have no basis whatsoever in factual reality. This is why I spend so much time saying that you don't just get to define your gods into existence. You can't just assign arbitrary characteristics to your imaginary friends. You have to show how you have observed those real existing entities and found out what they're actually like. Because in this instance, he doesn't understand any of the concepts that he's babbling about. Maybe he means the evolution of the god concept? I don't know, but most gods, they don't evolve because they're not biological entities. Even their believers don't think they're biological entities. Only biological entities undergo that kind of evolution. But of course, this guy probably has no idea what evolution actually is, so let's watch him keep proving what a dumb redneck he really is, because that's not exactly a surprise.
Even a tiny, tiny chance, and you get millions of gods.
What? Because again, this isn't how evolution actually works. Unless you're asserting that gods are biological entities that interbreed, the whole concept is laughably ridiculous. Now, there are ways I can see this going, so let me try to guess. I'll see if I can work my way down to his level intellectually. Is he trying to say that because gods somehow evolve, not the concept, but the gods themselves, that over an infinite amount of time that doesn't really exist, or space, which again doesn't really exist, there must be some kind of god just out there by random chance? Because that's dumb on all levels, as I've already described. It doesn't mean that whatever god might exist out there is your god. In fact, the chances of that being the case are ludicrously low. Why couldn't that god be the Slavic god whose entire sphere of influence is making sure that bread rises evenly, who is so utterly and completely pointless that we don't even remember his name anymore? And yes, that is an actual thing. Or how about Siametes, a Greek god whose entire job was to be lord of beans and patron to the bean market? Maybe that's the god that evolved. I'd love to run this past this idiot, but my IQ has taken enough of a hit as it is, and I don't even know where he's going with this, so let's get back to it and see.
I think atheism is stupid.
Wait, so that's it? He had no point in any of this at all. He knows nothing at all. He just thinks atheism is stupid, and that's it. Seriously? This is kind of pathetic, even for the religious. This is the point that I have to go and look at his comments because, yeah. And yes, just about everything there is an atheist laughing his ass off at this dipshit. Now, to his credit, he is actually responding, but his responses are every bit as stupid and ignorant as they were in the video. In one, he complains that atheism brought us abortion. So he knows absolutely nothing of his Bible, since it's in there too. Abortion has been practiced by the religious since time immemorial. This guy is a complete idiot. And like a lot of theists I've noticed, instead of just responding once, he responds over and over and over and over again. Like he can't just put it all into a single comment. It's like his brain can't just get it all out in one go, so he just vomits some garbage, and then he just comes back and vomits some more, and on and on and on, because his gray matter is inherently broken. This is just pathetic. But really, what can you expect? Religion tends to appeal to the terminally stupid, and, yeah, this is just an object lesson in that, isn't it? Kinda pathetic, right? Is there undeniable evidence for Jesus? No, of course not. There is no evidence for Jesus whatsoever. Nothing that stands up to critical scrutiny anyhow, but the religious love to make claims, laughable claims, that are painfully simple to rip apart. So, let's go do that again. Won't that be fun? So here comes one from Daily Bread 1914, which claims to have undeniable evidence that Jesus actually existed. How much do you want to bet that not only is there nothing undeniable here at all, but that none of it is evidence for a real Jesus whatsoever? A show of hands, please. Who wants to bet against the religious numbnuts? I know that's an easy bet to take because these people fail miserably all the time, but let's go see just how bad this one is.
Here's some evidence that Jesus actually existed.
And here's going to be a complete refutation of everything you say, and I don't even know what it might be yet. I'm going to explain why it's going to fail up front, because they all do this. Every single last one of them, at least of the examples that I've seen, they are all smuggling their theology into the equation. They can't help it, and all of them do it. They are firmly convinced that everything they believe must automatically be true. Thus, they will include their blind faith in any attempted proof, and that's where they all fall down. There is always a point in their claimed evidence where they just make the unjustified leap to, therefore God, or whatever else it is they're trying to prove. That leap is the failure, because the second you see that leap, that's the point at which they've lost. So let's go through this video and see where that happens, because it always does, and it always fails.
First, Golgotha.
Okay, a hill exists. So what? Because he's already assuming that all the stories in the Bible are true, and that's a bad assumption. Just because your book says Jesus was crucified on that hill doesn't mean it actually happened, any more than the fact that the Harry Potter books say that there's a platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station in London means that Hogwarts is real. You actually have to demonstrate it, and for the religious, we all know they just can't. Maybe I jumped the gun though, so let's get back to the video and see what he has to say.
Meaning place of the skull. This is thought to be the place where Jesus was really crucified.
Thought to be by people with an emotionally vested interest in thinking so. But that doesn't make it true, does it? Here's where he's just making that leap to, but I really want it to be true. Because in any credible claim, he'd be able to show that Jesus was really crucified there, and he simply can't. This is just a story in a book of mythology that you really happen to like. But that doesn't make it true. For supposed undeniable evidence that Jesus actually existed, this isn't starting out well. This is why all of these things fail. Hopefully, he's got something more impressive coming up, but I have the feeling it's going to be like this all the way through. This is the best that Christian apologetics can do. That's kind of sad, isn't it?
You can even see the resemblance of the skull in the rock to this day.
So what? Because you're really dealing with multiple claims here. First, that the site was used for Roman crucifixions, which we already knew that. So did the people back in the day when the stories about Jesus were being told. That doesn't mean that Jesus was actually crucified there. It doesn't mean that Jesus existed at all. This is a story being told, and you have to provide evidence that the story, as told, is actually true. But the religious can't do that, can they? They get to a certain point, and then they just run down the primrose path to their unsupported mythology because they really want it to be true. But that doesn't mean that it is, does it?
Next, we have the Garden Tomb, not far from Golgotha.
Which doesn't prove that Jesus was ever buried there. In fact, we know that it didn't happen. In the Bible, it is said that it was a brand new, just-cut tomb that Joseph of Arimathea bought, but the Garden Tomb has archaeological relics in it that date back a couple of hundred years BCE. This could not possibly have been Jesus' tomb. That's just church tradition, and the church has a long history of just making stuff up and then selling tickets so they get rich off the backs of the religiously gullible. These are just claims, and claims mean nothing without rational, objective corroboration. But I'm sure he's got more to say on the matter, so let's get back to it.
Due to its close proximity, this is thought to be the place where Jesus was brought after his crucifixion.
Something you have never established as true, because you haven't established that the crucifixion ever happened to begin with, and you have to do that before making any rational claims. Besides, how would you know Jesus was there if there was no body to prove it? Explain that one to us without using your faith and fee-fees. As I said, this couldn't have possibly been the tomb of Jesus if the stories in the Bible are true, and virtually no one except the lunatic fundamentalists think that it is. The Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox Church, in fact, just about every Christian sect on the planet, they all reject it. The whole style of the tomb fell out of favor back in the 7th to 8th century BCE. This is just a bullshit claim, just like all the rest.
He was then placed just behind where these bars now are. Next, we have the actual nails from a real crucifixion dating back over 2,000 years.
Sure, it's not Jesus' crucifixion though, so what difference does it make? We know that crucifixions happened. That does not establish that Jesus was one of them. You have to prove that your very specific person was actually crucified, and you have done absolutely nothing with that. That's why the religious just leap to unjustified, unsupported conclusions, and it's up to the skeptics to rein them in. Not that it matters, because they're going to believe it anyhow, because they're idiots.
The nails were found in the tomb of Caiaphas, which was the high priest involved in the trial of Jesus.
That's the story. You have no evidence for that whatsoever, other than my book says a thing. But that proves nothing. And in fact, the whole thing shows up on scam tours of the Holy Land to extract money from gullible tourists, but there's no evidence for anything of the sort. It makes good marketing copy to make empty claims, but that's about it. In fact, a lot of people saying that they could be the same nails used to crucify Jesus. Could be. Not are. Not that there's any evidence that they actually are, just that they could be, with hands held out for your money. In fact, there are some serious questions whether the nail through the heel bone is even associated with Caiaphas at all. When the tomb, which was found in 1990, was open, they described everything found within, including 2 nails. But those nails were never measured, sketched, or photographed, and they just kinda disappeared. Later on, a pair of nails, we can't tell if they're the same ones, but a pair of nails showed up at the lab of Professor Israel Hershkowitz, a forensic expert with no actual chain of custody back to the Caiaphas tomb at all. Hershkowitz refused to say anything about the validity of the nails, only going so far as to say, well, they appeared to be long enough to be driven through a hand. It's the religious that just grabbed it and ran for the hills. Further problems come with identification, assuming that these were actually found in the tomb, because there were 12 ossuaries in the tomb, bone cases, and supposedly one of the nails was found in one of them. Except there's no telling which one it might have been, because nobody kept any records, thus making it questionable whether it came from the one marked the son of Caiaphas. Ultimately, this all becomes wishful thinking, which, let's be honest, that's not at all surprising. That's just how religion works. There is no actual evidence here.
And lastly, the Shroud of Turin,
which is a clear Middle Ages forgery, absolutely established as not coming from the supposed time of Jesus. Of course, this becomes a matter of faith for the faithful, and they don't actually care about the reality. Oh, and it makes a lot of money for the church in Turin, Italy, and that's really all the Catholics are after. This isn't evidence because it's been firmly debunked. It's just wishful thinking for the people who are desperate to believe, but that's certainly not undeniable evidence for anything except for human stupidity. It's just bullshit for the people dumb enough to believe it, and that pretty much describes the religious, doesn't it?
The image on the shroud seems to be of a man around the same time frame and location of Christ.
Remember, listen to the words they actually use. Seems to be doesn't mean it's Jesus, even if it did date to the same era, which it simply does not. For undeniable evidence, he sure seems to be hedging his bets, doesn't he? Because you'd actually need to show that this is actually Jesus on the shroud, and there's no way whatsoever to do that. Even if we gave them that it was contemporary, which we know it isn't, but let's pretend, the Romans crucified a lot of people. So that doesn't mean that this is Jesus. Yet we know that this isn't legitimate. It was painted, and we know how it was likely done. We've had people replicate it before. The image couldn't possibly be true because actual physics doesn't work that way. If it was a cloth draped over a real body, that is not what the image would look like. The head and face especially would be completely distorted. The shroud is one of the most laughable claims that the religious make, but the absolute undeniable proof that it is a Middle Ages forgery created by Christians, that doesn't seem to stop them from believing it, does it? Because these people are desperate and stupid. What the hell else is new?
There's no paint or etching found on the shroud. Yet there is a clear image of a man which looks very similar to Christ.
How do you know that? Seriously, how can you even say that with a straight face? You only have artist depictions invented during the Middle Ages when the shroud was forged, and they have no idea what a real Jesus would have looked like either. That's why they're mostly pictures of a white guy with blue eyes. That was the ideal in Europe at the time. This has nothing to do with a real Semitic guy living in Palestine 2,000 years ago. These people can't possibly be this dumb, can they? Or, I don't know, maybe they can.
No one has been able to explain it, even though it's been through intense scrutiny.
Everyone has already been able to explain it. You just don't like the explanations. The church has a vested interest in keeping people coming through the door and offering them money, which is why they won't just admit what it really is. A forgery, an invention meant to scam people, just like all the other imaginary holy relics that churches have been using to scam people since time immemorial. Because that makes the churches look bad, doesn't it? Well, good, because it should.
Leading people to believe this is the real burial cloth of Jesus.
Not if you have a brain in your head. Because if you notice, he did absolutely everything that I said he was going to do. Take empty claims, assert a lot of things about them that are simply not demonstrable, maybe hedge his bets a little bit with questionable language, and then say, see, I told you it was Jesus. He never showed anything that stands up to any critical scrutiny. The only thing this proves is just how gullible and stupid the religious actually are. And that's not exactly a surprise, is it? None of this is evidence for anything but his own idiocy. You never got anywhere remotely close to a real, actually existing Jesus, but they don't have to, do they? This doesn't have to stand up to any real scrutiny because the religious, well, they just want to believe, don't they? They're not going to be skeptical of any of it because they just really want it to be true. Whereas people like you and I, we're going to be skeptical and see right through the emotional ploys because we don't want it to be true. I mean, we don't want it not to be true. We just want to know the truth. And the religious, they don't remotely care. They just want to believe, and that's just stupid. So another empty religious video down and firmly debunked because we know more than these morons do, and we're not afraid to point out where they go wrong. And they go wrong a lot. Not that they care, because they're all just morons, and that's sad.